The bell above the door of the Patriot's corner chimed a rusty welcome, but the sudden, heavy silence that fell as Marcus and Leo Thorne stepped inside was anything but welcoming. The twins shared a look, a silent, weary acknowledgement that even after 15 years, some things in their hometown had not changed at all. This was Cedar Creek, Georgia, their birthplace, but this bar felt like foreign territory. The air hung thick with the smell of stale beer and old fried food. Dim lights barely illuminated the walls, which were a shrine to local high school football glory from decades past, interspersed with "Don't tread on me" flags. Marcus and Leo, identical in their quiet strength, were dressed in simple jeans and Henleys. They were sober, their eyes taking in the room with a calm, practiced observance that was second nature. They found a small, sticky table in the corner, intentionally avoiding the bar stools. Sarah, the 40-something manager, looked up, her gaze flickering nervously toward a booth in the back before she hurried over, wiping her hands on her apron. "Just 2 bottled beers, please," Marcus said, his voice polite. Sarah nodded, quickly fetching their order. The anxiety rolling off her was palpable. She was clearly intimidated by the occupants of the back booth. There, Officers Miller, Shaw, and Kent were holding court. Miller, the clear leader, was loud and aggressive. Kent, the youngest, was visibly drunk, his laughter sharp and grating. Shaw just watched, nursing his beer, uneasy but silent. Miller's eyes narrowed as he watched the twins. "Well, look at that," he said, his voice loud enough to carry. "Don't see many strangers round here." Leo and Marcus ignored him. They were here on a melancholy duty, to sort through the last of their recently deceased mother's belongings at the old house. They spoke quietly of the sagging porch, a repair they needed to handle before the estate was settled. This harassment was an intrusion on their private grief. Their calm, however, seemed to infuriate Miller. He pushed himself out of the booth, flanked by Kent and Shaw, and walked over to their table. He leaned in, his breath smelling of whiskey. "I think you two better get out of here. This isn't exactly the kind of place for people like you." The tension in that bar is high, but the quiet strength of the Thorne twins is even higher. If you feel the power in their composure and want to see what happens next, let us know you're here by commenting with the number 8 below. This is the kind of story we are dedicated to at Black Brilliance. If you believe these stories need to be told, please subscribe and click that notification bell. Your support allows us to continue sharing content that inspires and empowers, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when they step outside. Now, let's continue. Marcus met Officer Miller's gaze, his voice perfectly level. "Is there a problem, officer?" That calm, simple question seemed to light a fuse in the volatile cop. Leo's hand, resting on the table, was perfectly still, but his eyes were cataloging the room. The exits, Miller's hands, the instability of the drunk Kent, a silent, tactical assessment honed in environments far more dangerous than a Georgia bar. "The problem," Miller snarled, his face turning a blotchy red, "is that I don't like suspicious characters on my turf. And you two look mighty suspicious." Kent, the drunkest of the three, let out a harsh laugh. He asked if there's a problem, Miller. "That's funny." Officer Shaw, standing just behind Miller, looked uneasy, his eyes darting to Sarah behind the bar, but he said nothing to stop it. Sarah, for her part, fumbled with a stack of glasses, her hands shaking. She discreetly angled her cell phone on the counter, hidden by a stack of napkins and pressed record. Marcus held up a hand, a gesture of peace, not surrender. "Look, officer," he said, his voice still infuriatingly calm. "We don't want any trouble. We're just finishing this beer and we'll leave. We're in town for family business." He was thinking of his mother, and the quiet duty they were there to perform. This ugly, familiar confrontation was staining it. The mention of family business seemed to enrage Miller further, as if their presence itself was an offense. He slammed his hand on the table, rattling the bottles. "No. You're leaving now." He jabbed a thick finger toward the door. "Get up." Slowly, and with a synchronization that was almost unsettling, Marcus and Leo stood. Their movements were economical, controlled. They left the cash for the beers on the table, more than enough to cover the bill, and a tip they knew Sarah wouldn't be allowed to keep. They walked toward the door. The bar was silent, the muted football game the only sound. As Marcus pushed the door open, He heard the scrape of chairs behind them. Miller, Shaw, and Kent were following. "We'll search you outside," Miller muttered, close behind them. "I'm sure I'll find something." As they pushed through the door into the dimly lit parking lot, the twins heard the officers following right behind them, the door slamming shut, plunging them into near darkness. The chill of the October night hit them, but it was Officer Miller's shove that was colder, sending Marcus hard against the hood of a rusty pickup truck. The metal creaked under the impact. Marcus braced himself on the cold hood but didn't fight back, his training screaming at him to let the enemy make the final, irreversible mistake. He glanced at Leo. His brother was already in an assessment stance, perfectly balanced, watching not Miller, but the drunk and unpredictable Kent. In the poorly lit back parking lot, the only illumination came from a single, flickering streetlight that cast long, menacing shadows. A dark, sensible Ford sedan pulled into the adjacent lot, unnoticed by the three officers, who were now cornering the twins. The driver, Ms. Evans, a sharply dressed black woman in her 50s, killed the engine and watched, her face hardening. Miller, drunk on power, began an aggressive, illegal pat-down on Marcus. He ripped Marcus's wallet from his back pocket and threw it onto the pavement. "What's this?" "Empty, huh?" he sneered. "Probably stole the truck, too." "That's not our truck, officer," Marcus said, his voice strained only by the anger he was suppressing. "Shut up," Miller growled. Seeing his boss's aggression, Officer Kent advanced on Leo, his movements sloppy. He fumbled with his belt and clicked open his collapsible baton. "Enough talk," he growled, swinging the baton clumsily toward Leo's legs. The attack was clumsy, but the intent was clear. Leo, however, moved with a fluid economy that seemed impossible. He didn't strike. He simply shifted his weight and parried, evading the swing entirely. At the exact same instant, both Marcus and Leo pulled out their own cell phones. "You are now being recorded attempting assault with a deadly weapon, Officer Kent," Leo stated. His voice was no longer that of a quiet man in a bar. It was sharp, clear, and carried an undeniable, ringing authority. Just as Miller, enraged by the recording, lunged forward to grab the phones, a sharp, female voice cut through the darkness. "That's enough, Officer Miller." All heads turned to see Ms. Evans approaching, her badge already in her hand. "The officers have crossed the line, the twins are recording, and the DA has just arrived. The situation is explosive. If you are on the edge of your seat and still watching this, show us you're here by commenting with the number 8 below. This is the kind of powerful moment we live for at Black Brilliance. If you aren't subscribed, I strongly encourage you to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because you do not want to miss the reveal. Your support helps us continue to create amazing content that informs and inspires you. Now let's continue. Officer Miller, blinded by rage and the sudden exposure of the phone cameras, lunged forward. "You have no right to film me. Give me that phone." "That's enough, Officer Miller." The sharp, female voice cut through the parking lot, freezing Miller mid-lunge. It was the voice of Ms. Evans, who had seen exactly what just happened. She stepped fully into the dim light, a professional woman in her 50s, her expression radiating an authority that stopped all three officers cold. This is police business, ma'am," Miller sputtered, trying to regain his footing. "I am Assistant District Attorney Evans," she stated, holding up her badge, "and I just witnessed harassment, intimidation, and assault." Miller's defiance faltered. Officer Shaw, who had been lingering by the car, looked visibly pale, his eyes wide with dawning horror. Kent, still holding the baton, just stared, the alcohol fog in his brain evaporating rapidly. Ms. Evans ignored the officers and looked past them, her eyes widening slightly in recognition as she focused on the twins. "Commander Thorne?" "Captain Thorne," she asked, her voice softening in disbelief. "What on earth? Are you two all right?" The words hit the officers like a physical blow. Miller, utterly confused, turned and looked at the twins as if seeing them for the first time. "What?" he stammered. "What did you call them?" Marcus lowered his phone, though the red recording light stayed on. He stepped away from the truck hood, his posture shifting subtly, losing its forced stillness and gaining a military bearing. "Captain Marcus Thorne, United States Army," he said, his voice clear and resonant. Leo, standing beside him, also lowered his phone. Commander Leo Thorne, Navy SEALs. Miller and Kent's faces drained of all color as the sound of approaching sirens, called by Ms. Evans moments earlier, grew louder, sealing their fate in the dark parking lot. Two county sheriff's patrol cars, lights flashing red and blue across the stunned faces of the officers, pulled into the parking lot, sealing off the only exit. Officer Shaw, who had been hesitant all night, was the first to drop his gaze, his hands visibly trembling. He knew the procedure, and he knew they were finished. Miller, however, remained rigid, seething with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Kent was now actively crying, muttering, "I'm gonna lose my job, I'm gonna lose my job." The senior deputy stepped out, a man who clearly respected the assistant DA. "Ms. Evans," he nodded, assessing the scene. "Deputy," Ms. Evans said, her voice firm. "These three officers, Miller, Shaw, and Kent, have been harassing these two gentlemen. I personally witnessed Officer Kent attempt to strike Commander Thorne with his baton, and Officer Miller assault Captain Thorne against that truck." As if on cue, Sarah, the bar manager, emerged from the back door, emboldened by the arrival of the real police. She hurried over, holding out her phone. "I got it, Ms. Evans," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "I got them threatening the boys inside, too." Ms. Evans took the phone. "Thank you, Sarah. Combined with the captain's and commander's footage, I believe we have everything." The deputy turned to the three officers. "Officer Miller, you and your men are being detained pending a full investigation into assault and abuse of authority. Please place your service weapons on the hood of the truck. Now." "You can't do this," Miller roared, making one last desperate plea. "It's our word against theirs. We are police officers." "No," Ms. Evans replied coldly, stepping forward. "It's your word against two decorated military commanders, a local business owner, and the DA's office." The finality of her statement crushed Miller's remaining defiance. The deputies moved in, taking their weapons and cuffing them. As Miller was placed in the patrol car, he locked eyes with Marcus, his face a mask of disbelief and hatred. "This isn't over," he whispered. 6 months later, the for-release sign flapping in the spring breeze outside the darkened, empty building that was the Patriot's Corner told its own story. The change in the bar's status was a small, visible sign of the much larger, systemic change that had quietly swept through the Cedar Creek Police Department. The video footage, combined with Ms. Evans' testimony and the twins' unimpeachable status, had been devastating. Miller, Shaw, and Kent were immediately fired. The subsequent internal investigation, spurred by Ms. Evans, led to 17 other officers being dismissed or retrained for similar patterns of harassment. Miller, stripped of his badge and his pension, was now serving coffee at a roadside diner 60 miles away, his face aged and bitter. Shaw worked a night security job at a warehouse, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Kent, having lost everything, was in rehab. Meanwhile, Sarah had opened a new diner, Sarah's Place, a bright, welcoming restaurant that served everyone. Ms. Evans was re-elected as assistant DA with an overwhelming 73% of the vote. The Thorne twins, having completed their family business in Cedar Creek, returned to their duties, but the incident had propelled them into new roles. Captain Marcus Thorne was now a sought-after lecturer, speaking to police cadets about ethics and de-escalation. Commander Leo Thorne was advising senior officials at the Pentagon on civilian-military relations, using his experience to build bridges. The story ends on Marcus, standing before a lecture hall of new recruits. "Respect is not demanded," he told them, his voice calm and steady. "It is earned. And it is never, ever determined by the color of someone's skin." The final shot is of the twins, months later, on another leave, sitting in a bright booth at Sarah's Place. Sarah brings them 2 bottled beers and a smile. They clink their bottles together, finally sharing that quiet beer they wanted in their hometown. The story of Marcus and Leo ends not with the noise of conflict, but with the quiet, simple peace they always deserved. It reminds us that when we set aside our judgment based on appearance, we open the door to true justice and understanding. Their profound dignity in the face of prejudice shows that real strength isn't about power, but about character. If this story about resilience touched your heart, We hope you'll share it with others and continue the conversation by subscribing to Black Brilliance for more stories that uplift and inspire.